He swore he would never let anyone in again. For 3 years, Logan Hayes kept that promise, until the afternoon a woman knocked on his door asking to borrow a power drill. She was worth more money than most people would see in 100 lifetimes. He was a carpenter who couldn't even finish his own backyard deck. What happened between them that summer wasn't supposed to happen at all. But the most dangerous thing wasn't falling for her. It was what he did when he realized he already had. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. Like and follow, so you don't miss a single moment. The morning Logan Hayes split his thumb open with a hammer, he decided the deck could wait another week. He stood in the backyard staring at the wound. Not a deep cut, just enough to bleed through a paper towel and ruin his mood. And told himself the same thing he'd been telling himself for 3 years. There's always next weekend. The unfinished deck sat behind him like an accusation. Raw lumber, half the boards warped from 2 winters of rain and sun. A stack of unused screws rusting in a coffee can he'd left uncovered since October. It looked exactly like what it was. A project started by a man who still believed the future was something worth building toward. Abandoned by a man who had quietly stopped believing that. His daughter's voice cut through the yard before he even made it back to the back door. "Daddy, you're bleeding." Lily stood on the grass in her yellow rain boots. She wore them regardless of weather, a habit Logan had long since stopped trying to correct, holding a juice box in one hand and a plastic dinosaur in the other. She was 8 years old and had her mother's eyes, dark and serious, the kind of eyes that noticed everything and apologized for nothing. "It's nothing, Bug." He held up his thumb like evidence. "Just a scratch." "It doesn't look like a scratch." "Well, it is." She considered this with the particular skepticism of a child who has learned that adults frequently underestimate their own damage. Then she went back to the dinosaur, apparently satisfied, or at least willing to let it go. Logan wrapped his thumb in a fresh paper towel and went inside to find a bandage. The kitchen was clean. He kept it clean out of discipline rather than preference, and the counter held the evidence of their Saturday morning: 2 plates with toast crumbs, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, Lily's orange juice glass still sticky where she'd missed her mouth. He cleaned it up automatically, muscle memory, the 10,000 small routines that kept a household running when only one adult was responsible for all of it. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Sarah left, and in that time, Logan had developed a kind of competence that looked, from the outside, like he had everything figured out. The dishes got done. The bills got paid. Lily went to school with clean clothes and finished homework. He showed up to her soccer games and her school plays and her birthday parties, and he smiled at the right moments, and he thanked the other parents who offered to help, and he meant it when he said he was fine. He was fine. That was the thing. He actually was. Fine was just a smaller word than people realized. He was 32 years old, and he had a good trade, and he had a daughter he loved more than anything he had ever loved in his life. And he lived in a town called Harrow Cove on the Maine coast, where the salt air came through the windows in the morning and the summers were short and worth every minute. His house needed work, didn't they all? But it was his. He'd bought it at 30 with money saved from 7 years of building other people's homes, and there was something that felt exactly right about that, even if the backyard deck remained a permanent argument against his follow-through. He was fine. He was also, if he was being honest with himself, which he tried not to be most of the time, profoundly alone in a way that had started to feel structural, like a load-bearing wall you don't notice until someone asks you to move it. He pressed the bandage over his thumb and went back outside. The moving truck arrived next door on a Tuesday, which was unusual because people who were serious about moving arrived on Saturdays when they had time to unpack. Logan noticed it from the driveway when he was loading his work truck. A white Chevy with the tailgate that stuck and the company name Hayes Carpentry in magnetic letters he'd bought at a hardware store and never replaced with a proper decal. He glanced over with the idle curiosity of someone who had lived next to an empty house for 4 months and registered mostly that a truck was there, and that 2 men in gray shirts were carrying furniture wrapped in moving blankets up the front porch steps. He didn't think much about it. He had a job site in Pembroke, and he was already running 15 minutes late because of the thumb. When he came home that evening, the truck was gone, and the house next door had lights on in the windows. Lily noticed first, as Lily noticed most things. She pressed her face to the kitchen window while Logan was making dinner and said, with the declarative confidence of someone filing a report, "Someone moved in. I know. Are they nice? Don't know yet. Should we bring them something? Like what?" She thought about it. "Cookies." "We don't have cookies." "We could make some." Logan looked at the chicken on the cutting board and the clock on the microwave and calculated the distance between where he was and where she wanted him to be. Maybe this weekend. Lily accepted this without protest, which meant she either believed him or had already moved on to the next idea. With Lily, it was genuinely hard to tell. He didn't see the new neighbor that week. She appeared on a Friday afternoon, and the first thing Logan registered was that she was standing on her front porch looking at a page of instructions with the focused expression of a person who had never in their life been defeated by a set of instructions and was not intending to start now. She was around 30, he guessed. Dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, jeans, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. There was a flat-pack bookshelf box propped against the railing beside her, and she had a screwdriver in her hand that was, visibly, the wrong size for whatever she was trying to do. Logan might have just gone inside. He almost did. But he was a carpenter, and watching someone use the wrong tool for a job was a specific kind of pain he couldn't entirely ignore. He crossed the strip of grass between their driveways without giving himself time to think about it. "That's a Phillips head," he said. "If the screws on that thing are flathead, you're going to be there a while." She looked up. Her eyes were gray, the kind of gray that changed depending on the light. Not a remarkable observation, just one that landed in his mind and stayed there longer than it should have. "Are they flathead?" she asked. "Probably. Most of that Swedish stuff is." She looked at the screwdriver, then back at him, then back at the screwdriver, as though running a brief internal audit. "I have a flathead somewhere," she said. "I just don't know which box it's in." "I've got one." He hadn't planned to say that either. She smiled, not the polished, public-facing smile of someone performing pleasantness, but the slightly reluctant smile of a person who is genuinely amused by the situation and not trying to hide it. "I'm Victoria," she said. "I just moved in." "I know, I'm Logan. I live next door." "I know," she said. "Your daughter waved at me through the window 2 days ago." He felt his face do something involuntary. "She does that." It was sweet. He went and got the flathead. He came back and handed it to her and watched her take the first screw out with the kind of confident efficiency that told him she was someone who figured things out rather than waited for them to be figured out for her. He didn't stay. There was no reason to stay. He said good luck with the bookshelf and went inside, and that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, she knocked on his front door. It was a Sunday morning, which meant Logan was in the backyard making a half-hearted effort at the deck, while Lily sat on the grass and drew in a sketchbook. He'd propped the back gate open to carry lumber through, so he heard the knock through the house from outside, which meant he had about 4 seconds to decide whether to answer it before whoever it was assumed he wasn't home. He answered it. Victoria was standing on the porch with her hair down this time, which was a detail he noticed and immediately filed away as irrelevant. She was holding a bag. "Do you have a power drill I can borrow?" she said without preamble. "I have one on order, but it won't be here until Thursday, and I need to hang curtain rods today, or I'm going to lose my mind. I have 10 windows in that house." Logan had 3 power drills, which was probably more than any one person needed. "Yeah," he said. "What gauge are the wall anchors?" She blinked. "I don't know." "What are the curtain rods mounted in, drywall or plaster?" A pause. "I genuinely don't know." "Old house?" 1920s. "Probably plaster then. You'll want a masonry bit or you'll crack the wall." He stepped back from the door. "Come in. I'll get you the right setup." She followed him through the kitchen. He registered with mild embarrassment, the breakfast dishes still on the table and Lily's art project spread across the counter, construction paper and glue sticks, and what appeared to be a half-finished paper giraffe, and out through the back door. Lily looked up from her sketchbook with the alert interest of a child encountering an unexpected adult. "This is my daughter, Lily," Logan said. "Lily, this is Victoria. She lives next door." "I know," Lily said. "You're the one I waved at." Victoria laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that changed her whole face. "That's me." Did you finish your bookshelf? I did. My dad helped. He lent me a screwdriver. I did most of the work myself. Lily considered this, then nodded with apparent respect. Logan found the drill in the garage and spent 5 minutes explaining which bit to use and why, and Victoria listened with the focused attention of someone who was used to learning things quickly and retaining them. When he showed her how to set the torque, she practiced it twice before she was satisfied. He noticed that about her, the way she didn't pretend to understand before she actually did. I'll bring it back by tonight, she said. No rush. I'm not using it today. She looked at the deck, the sad, half-built, warped board deck, and then back at him. Is that yours? She asked. Unfortunately. What happened to it? He picked up a piece of lumber and knocked the mud off the end against his boot. Life, he said. Mostly life. She didn't push it. She thanked him and took the drill and left, and Lily watched her go with an expression Logan couldn't quite read. She's pretty, Lily said. She's our neighbor, Logan said. Lily returned to her giraffe with an expression that suggested she understood the distinction and found it unconvincing. Victoria brought the drill back that evening, along with half a loaf of sourdough bread she'd made herself, which Logan hadn't expected, and which Lily declared, after her first bite, to be the best thing she'd ever eaten, a pronouncement she made with the particular drama of a child who has not yet learned to temper her superlatives. She bakes, Logan said, after Victoria left. And she's pretty, Lily said. Go brush your teeth. You didn't say she wasn't. Lily. She went to brush her teeth, but not before giving him a look over her shoulder that was either deeply perceptive or completely random, and with Lily, it was always difficult to distinguish between the two. Logan put the bread on the counter and stood in the kitchen for a moment, not quite doing anything. He was fine. The following Saturday, Victoria appeared in the backyard. This wasn't as surprising as it might have been because she'd texted him the night before. They had exchanged numbers, a practical necessity established at the moment he'd realized she might need to ask questions about plaster walls, and said simply, I'm free tomorrow if you want another set of hands on the deck. I'm good at following instructions, and I won't get in the way. He had stared at the message for longer than it warranted. Then he'd replied, You don't have to do that. She'd replied, I know. What time? He told himself it was a neighborly thing. 2 adults, one of whom had carpentry skills, and one of whom had apparently decided to learn some, working on a home improvement project together. Nothing about that was unusual. People helped each other with their houses all the time. That was a thing that happened in towns like this, towns where people knew each other's names and left their gates unlocked and sometimes showed up on Saturday mornings with coffee. She showed up with coffee. 2 cups, black, from the place in town she'd apparently already found, which told him something about her, though he wasn't sure what exactly. And she set them on the sawhorse and stood looking at the deck layout with her arms crossed and her head tilted and said, Okay, tell me what needs to happen. So he did. He explained the structure, the joists that needed sistering, the boards that had to come up, the ledger board situation that was going to be a problem once they got into it. She asked questions that were specific and practical. She didn't make the mistake of pretending she knew more than she did, and she didn't apologize for knowing less. She just asked, absorbed, moved on. They worked for 4 hours. It wasn't efficient, exactly. Logan spent time explaining techniques he could have just done himself in half the time. But it was comfortable in a way he hadn't expected. Victoria worked with her sleeves rolled up and a pencil tucked behind her ear, and a tendency to go quiet when she was measuring that he found, against all reason, almost companionable. Lily came out around noon and sat on the back steps eating a sandwich, narrating observations about their progress with the authority of a foreman who had done none of the physical labor. That board is crooked, Lily announced at one point. Victoria looked at the board, then at the level. She's right, she said. Logan looked at the board. He knew the board was slightly crooked. He had been intending to address the board. He picked up the pry bar. How does she know that? Victoria asked, low enough that Lily wouldn't hear. She watches everything, Logan said. Always has. She was 2 years old and she could tell if something was off-center on the wall. I don't know where she got it. Victoria watched Lily for a moment, who had moved on from the board and was now explaining something to a stick she'd found, a full one-sided conversation delivered with absolute conviction. "She's remarkable," Victoria said. It wasn't an empty compliment. There was something in her voice that was more than polite, something that sounded like she meant exactly what she said and knew exactly why she was saying it. Logan felt it somewhere in his chest, a small, warm pressure he immediately tried to ignore. "Yeah," he said. "She is." He pulled the board and didn't say anything else. Chetika tease. By the third Saturday, it had become a pattern without either of them formally establishing it as one. Victoria came over. They worked. Lily supervised. Victoria and Lily talked, actually talked, at a level of mutual engagement that Logan observed from the corner of his eye with a feeling he would not have been able to name accurately if pressed. They discussed the relative merits of various dinosaurs, the structural integrity of Lily's paper giraffe, improved since the first version, the question of whether seagulls had opinions, and the best strategies for winning at a card game Lily had invented herself and whose rules changed whenever she was losing. Victoria played every round without complaint. She lost every round without complaint. She also, Logan noticed, started winning around the fourth game, which meant she had either gotten lucky or had quietly figured out the pattern in Lily's rule changes and adapted accordingly. He suspected the latter. "She's good with her," his friend Darnell said, one evening when Logan had made the mistake of mentioning any of this. Darnell was 45 and had known Logan since they'd worked the same job site in their 20s, and he had the particular directness of a man who did not believe in wasting words. "She's just being neighborly," Logan said. "That's a lot of Saturdays for neighborly. She's building something to do. She works remotely, she's new in town, she's bored." Darnell looked at him the way Darnell looked at things that didn't add up. "She's a billionaire, and she's spending her Saturdays doing carpentry in your backyard. She said she likes working with her hands." "Sure she does." "Darnell, I'm not saying anything. You're definitely saying something." Darnell picked up his beer. "I'm saying that woman is not spending her Saturdays with you because she's bored. That's what I'm saying." Logan didn't have a response to that, so he changed the subject, which was the particular evasion of a man who has heard a true thing and needs time to pretend he hasn't. The thing about spending time with Victoria was that it wasn't what he'd expected. He'd expected, in some half-formed way, that someone of her background would have sharp edges to it, the particular quality of someone who had built something very large and knew it, the subtle gravitational field of significant wealth. He knew that world existed. He'd done enough work in enough expensive houses to understand the way money arranged people around itself. But Victoria was not like that. She ate her lunch on the back steps the same way Lily did, sitting with her elbows on her knees and a sandwich in both hands. She got sawdust on her flannel and didn't appear to notice. She argued with Logan about whether the deck board should run parallel or diagonal to the house. Diagonal, she maintained, was structurally superior and also looked better, which he acknowledged was correct on both counts, but would cost them an extra 2 weekends of work, which she said was fine, which he said was easy for her to say, which made her laugh in a way that sounded genuinely delighted rather than polite. She told him slowly over several Saturdays the shape of her life. Not the headlines, those he could have found in 30 seconds online, and he didn't, because it felt like a kind of violation, but the real version. The engineering company she'd built from a single contract in her mid-20s, the years of 16-hour days and bad coffee, and the specific loneliness of being the only woman in too many rooms. The way success had arrived not as a moment, but as a slow accumulation, so gradual she hadn't recognized it, until one day she'd looked up and the company had 400 employees, and she was the one signing paychecks. "Does it feel different than you thought it would?" he asked her once on an afternoon when the work had gone well and they were sitting on the back steps with the last of the coffee, the deck showing actual progress for the first time in 3 years. She thought about this with the particular care she brought to questions she considered worth taking seriously. "Quieter," she said finally. "I thought it would feel loud, like I thought there would be a moment, a switch that flipped." She paused. "It's quieter than I expected, and lonelier than I expected, and I'm not sure those two things are unrelated." Logan turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Yeah," he said. "I know that feeling." She looked at him, and the look lasted 1 second longer than it should have, and he looked away first, back at the deck, and picked up a screw from the can and turned it over in his fingers without any intention of using it. "What about you?" she asked. "Does it feel different than you thought it would, doing this alone?" He considered several answers and discarded them. "I don't remember what I thought it would feel like," he said. "Lily was 5 when Sarah left. 5 is a long time ago. It's just what it is now." "Do you miss her?" He thought about this honestly, which was the question beneath the question. "I miss the version of things I thought we were going to have," he said. "I don't know if that's the same thing." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "That's honest," she said. "It's the most honest answer I've got." She nodded, and they sat there for another few minutes without talking, which was something Logan had not experienced with another adult in a long time. The specific comfort of shared silence that didn't require filling. He was still afraid. He recognized the feeling by now, the way it showed up at the edge of moments that were going well, like weather coming in off the water. The feeling that said, "This is too much, this is too close." "You know how this ends." He knew how it ended. He had the evidence. So he said that afternoon when he got up to take the cups back inside, "You're a good person to have around, Victoria." It was a careful sentence. It was a sentence that meant something and also put it at a safe distance. She took it the way she took most things he said. She didn't push on it, didn't test it, just received it and let it stand. "So are you," she said. And he went inside, and he stood at the kitchen sink rinsing the cups, and he looked out the window at the half-finished deck and the afternoon light lying flat across the new boards, and he felt something he had been working very hard not to feel. He left the feeling at the kitchen window and went to pick Lily up from her friend's house, and he drove with the radio too loud all the way there and most of the way back. He was fine. He was absolutely fine. The fourth Saturday started like all the others, except Logan burned the coffee. He didn't usually burn the coffee. He had a system. The old drip machine, the dark roast from the grocery store 2 towns over, 4.5 minutes. And he ran it the same way every morning without thinking. But he'd been up since 5 with a thought he couldn't shake. Something about the ledger board and the way the flashing was sitting wrong against the house. And by the time he remembered the coffee, it had been sitting on the burner for 40 minutes and tasted like something you'd use to strip paint. He dumped it and started over and told himself that was the only reason his hands weren't entirely steady. Victoria arrived at 8:30 with her own coffee, same as the last 2 weeks. 2 cups from the place in town she'd made her regular. She handed him one through the back gate without a word, which was something he'd noticed about her. The way she read situations accurately and didn't narrate them. She could tell when he'd had a rough morning. She didn't ask about it. She just handed him the coffee and picked up the pencil from the sawhorse where he'd left it and said, "Where were we?" "Flashing," he said. "Right." She looked at the junction where the deck met the house, the thin metal strip that was supposed to direct water away from the foundation. "It's not sitting right." "No." "Is that a big problem?" "It will be, eventually." He crouched down to look at the angle. "Water gets behind there, it'll rot the rim joist before you know it's happening. By the time you see the damage, the problem's already 6 inches deep." She crouched beside him, close enough that he could smell the coffee on her breath, and studied the gap with the same focused attention she brought to everything. "So we pull it and reset it. We pull it and reset it." "Okay." She straightened up. "Tell me what to do." This was the thing about working with her that he had not anticipated. She was genuinely useful. Not in the polite, enthusiastic way of someone who wanted to seem capable, but in the actual, practical sense of a person who paid attention and retained what she learned and applied it without needing to be told twice. By the 4th Saturday, she knew which end of the pry bar to use and when not to use it at all. She understood the difference between a structural cut and a finish cut, even if she still made the former a little cautiously. She asked better questions than most of the apprentices he'd worked with, which was saying something. He told her this once, in a sideways fashion. You'd make a decent apprentice. And she'd given him a look that was equal parts amused and dangerous. "I have 400 employees," she said. "I'm not starting at the bottom again." "You basically are, though." "I'm a volunteer, that's different." Is it? Volunteers can leave whenever they want. He had looked at her when she said that, just for a second, just long enough to notice that she didn't look away first. Then he'd gone back to the flashing, and neither of them had pursued it. That was how it went in those early weeks. Small moments that got close to something and then didn't. Sentences that had a second meaning they both chose to leave untouched. Logan was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound in the walls. Something you can't quite locate. Something you're not sure is real or just the house settling. He was aware also that awareness was not the same as doing anything about it. Lily was home that Saturday, which meant the dynamic shifted in the particular way it always shifted when she was present. She didn't join them on the deck, mostly because Logan had established a firm rule about power tools and 8-year-olds, but she operated from the back steps with the comfortable authority of someone who had decided the back steps were her domain and saw no reason to dispute it. She was working on a new art project, a painted rock apparently, though what it was meant to depict remained unclear even to Lily, and she provided commentary at intervals. "That board sounds different from the other ones," she announced around 10 in the morning. Logan stopped. He tapped the board in question with his knuckle. Then he tapped the one beside it. She was right. There was a hollow note to it, something slightly off in the resonance. "It's probably not fully seated on the joist," Victoria said, before he could say it himself. He looked at her. She shrugged. "You explained joist to me 3 Saturdays ago." "I know, I'm just—" He tapped the board again. "Yeah, she's right." "She's usually right," Victoria said, with the particular tone of someone who has been paying attention for longer than they've let on. Lily, from the steps, said nothing, but she smiled at her rock with the small private satisfaction of someone whose observations have been officially confirmed. They worked through the morning, and when noon came, Logan made sandwiches, turkey and Swiss, nothing complicated. He'd long since stopped trying to cook impressively for anyone. And they ate on the steps, the 3 of them, with Lily between them, explaining the backstory of each of her painted rocks in the serious, interconnected mythology she'd apparently been developing for months. "That one is Gerald," she told Victoria, holding up a gray oval. "He's the oldest. He remembers the Ice Age." "How old is he exactly?" Victoria asked. 12,000 years. "And how did he end up in your yard?" "He migrated," Lily said, in a tone that implied this was self-evident. "Of course," Victoria said, and said it so straight that Lily looked at her with something close to respect, the look of a child who has found an adult willing to operate within her world rather than outside it. Logan ate his sandwich and watched the 2 of them and felt that pressure in his chest again, the warm and inconvenient one. And he took a long drink of water and looked at the deck instead. It was coming together. Slowly, imperfectly, with the particular stubbornness of a project that had resisted completion for years, but it was coming together. The new boards were clean against the old frame, the flashing was reset properly, and the diagonal pattern that Victoria had advocated for, correctly, he had to admit, gave the whole thing a different quality, something that looked considered rather than just constructed. "It's starting to look like something," Victoria said, standing and looking at it with her hands on her hips. "It was always something," Logan said, "just not something finished. There's a difference." "Yeah." She looked at him, not at the deck. "You're good at this." "It's my job." "I mean—" She paused, searching for the word. "The way you see it before it's done. The way you know what it's supposed to be." He didn't have an answer for that, so he picked up the level and checked a board that didn't need checking. She watched him do it, and he could feel her watching, and he kept his eyes on the level until the moment passed. That evening, after Victoria had gone home and Lily was in the bath, Logan sat on the back steps alone in the cooling air and looked at the deck for a long time. The light was going, that particular Maine summer light that lasted too long and left too fast, and the new boards caught it differently than the old ones, cleaner, with less gray in them. He thought about what Victoria had said, the way you know what it's supposed to be. He thought about the fact that he had not known, for a long time, what his own life was supposed to be. He had the outline, the job, the house, the daughter, the routines that kept everything moving. But the shape inside the outline had gone blurry somewhere in the last 3 years, or maybe longer. Maybe since before Sarah left, if he was willing to look at it that honestly. He wasn't always willing. He got up and went inside and checked that Lily was out of the bath and into her pajamas, and he read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through, a long fantasy novel about a girl who could talk to animals, which Lily had selected herself and which Logan had to admit was pretty good. And he turned out her light and sat for a moment in the dark of her doorway, listening to her breathe. She was 8 years old, and she remembered the Ice Age. He went to his own room and lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling, and did not think about Victoria Ashford, and did not think about warm pressure in his chest, and did not think about anything at all. He was fine. He fell asleep with his boots on, which happened sometimes, and which he always promised himself he'd stop doing. He never stopped doing it. The information came to him sideways, the way most things about Victoria did. He was at the hardware store on a Tuesday, picking up a box of screws and a new blade for the circular saw, when he ran into Pete Callahan, who ran the gas station on Route 9 and knew everyone's business without appearing to seek it out. Pete mentioned, in the way he mentioned everything, as though he were simply narrating the weather, that the woman who'd bought the old Mercer place on Lighthouse Road was apparently some kind of big deal. Big deal as in billion-dollar big deal, Pete clarified, because apparently someone's cousin had looked her up online and found her picture in a business magazine, some article about women reshaping the engineering industry. Victoria Ashford, Pete said. You know her? She's my neighbor, Logan said. Pete looked at him with renewed interest. She seems normal, he said. Came in for gas last week, paid cash, didn't make a thing of herself. She doesn't, Logan said. He paid for the screws and the blade and drove home with the radio off, which he almost never did. He had known, in some general way, that she was successful. She'd told him she'd built an engineering company. She'd said 400 employees. He'd done the math in a loose, abstract way and understood that this was significant. But knowing something in a general way and having it confirmed by a stranger in a hardware store were 2 different experiences, and the difference sat in his chest with a slightly uncomfortable weight. He thought, driving home, about all the Saturdays she'd spent in his backyard, the coffee she'd brought, the bread she'd made, the way she'd crouched in the dirt to look at flashing angles and gotten her jeans dirty and not mentioned it. He thought about the fact that this woman, who could have been anywhere, could have been doing anything, had the resources to build herself a different Saturday in a different part of the world every single week, had spent 4 of them helping a carpenter fix a deck she had no stake in. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the truck for a minute. Then he went inside, because sitting in the truck wasn't going to answer anything. He didn't bring it up with her directly. He wasn't sure why. Part of it was that it felt like the kind of thing that would change the texture of what they had, would introduce a formal quality that hadn't been there before, a consciousness of the gap between her life and his that he'd been comfortably ignoring. The gap was real. He wasn't naive. But in the backyard, on the deck, with sawdust on her sleeve and a pencil behind her ear, the gap didn't announce itself the way he might have expected it to. She wasn't performing simplicity. That was the thing he kept coming back to. She wasn't slumming. She was just there, present in the particular way that some people were and most people weren't. He decided to leave the hardware store conversation where it was, filed in the category of things he knew and didn't need to act on. He was good at that category. The 5th Saturday was the one where things started to shift in a way he couldn't easily redirect. It started normally enough. Victoria arrived at 8:30, coffee, tools, the quiet settling in that had become their version of a routine. The morning was overcast, which was fine for working, better than full sun on the exposed lumber. And they got through more than usual because the conditions were good, and they'd found a rhythm by now that didn't require a lot of explaining. But around 11, Lily came out of the house with a question. She stood at the edge of the deck, not on it. She respected the rule. Logan had to give her that. And looked at Victoria with the direct, unself-conscious regard of a child who has not yet learned to camouflage her curiosity. "Do you have kids?" she asked. Victoria was holding the drill, about to drive a screw, and she paused. "No," she said. "I don't." "Do you want them?" "Lily," Logan said. "It's a real question," Lily said, without looking at him. Victoria set the drill down on the sawhorse. She crouched to Lily's level, which was something she did without thinking, Logan had noticed. She never talked down to Lily. Never use the elevated register that adults often deployed with children, the slightly louder and more simplified version of themselves. I don't know, Victoria said. I haven't figured that out yet. Lily considered this. My dad says it's okay not to have figured things out. He says figuring things out takes longer than people tell you it will. Victoria looked at Logan over Lily's head. He looked at the board he was measuring and said nothing, which was answer enough. That sounds like something worth remembering, Victoria said. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back inside. Logan kept measuring. The silence stretched for a moment, not uncomfortable, but different from the silences that had come before. You say that to her? Victoria asked. Not critical, just curious. I say a lot of things to her that I probably should have told myself first, he said. That's parenting, I think. You give them the advice you needed when you were 10 and didn't have anyone to give it to you. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, what did you need when you were 10? He looked up from the board. Probably to be told it was okay to be scared, he said, and then immediately regretted saying it because it was more honest than he'd intended, and he couldn't take it back. She didn't make a thing of it. She just picked up the drill again and said, What's the spacing on these boards supposed to be? 3/8 of an inch. Right. She found the spacer and placed it. Like this? Yeah, like that. And they moved on, which was both a relief and, in a way he wouldn't have admitted to anyone, slightly disappointing. The work that day went later than usual. They were so close to completing one full section of the deck that Logan pushed through until nearly 4, which he rarely did on weekends. By the time they stopped, his back was stiff and his hands were covered in a fine layer of sawdust that had mixed with sweat into something grimy, and Victoria had a streak of wood stain on her forearm from when the brush had slipped and she'd caught it with her skin instead of the cloth. She was looking at the streak now, turning her arm over with the mild curiosity of someone cataloging damage. It'll come off, Logan said. Mineral spirits. I don't have mineral spirits. I do. He went into the garage and came back with the can and a rag. He held them out to her. She took them and worked at the streak for a moment, then made a face. It's still there. You have to work it in a little. I am working it in. More than that. She held out her arm to him with the patient exasperation of someone who has just decided to concede a point, and he took the rag and applied it properly. More pressure, better angle, following the grain of the stain rather than fighting it. He was aware, in a concrete and specific way, of her arm in his hands, the warm weight of it, the fine bones at the wrist. He kept his eyes on the stain and got it out in about 20 seconds, which was 20 seconds he spent very carefully not thinking. He handed the rag back. Thank you, she said. Sure. They stood there for a beat, not long, just a beat. And then she coiled the rag and set it on the sawhorse and said she should probably head home before it got dark, which it wasn't, not for another 3 hours, but he didn't point that out. He watched her go through the gate and then stood in the backyard alone for a minute, turning the mineral spirits can in his hands. He set it down on the sawhorse. He picked it back up. He set it down again. He was not fine. He was, in fact, in the early stages of something he'd specifically arranged his whole life to avoid. June became July, and the deck became something that looked genuinely close to done. This was its own complicated feeling because the deck had been Logan's most reliable excuse. Every Saturday that needed filling, every moment that might otherwise have required him to ask himself what he was doing with his time, the deck was there. And now it was almost finished, which meant the Saturdays would need a different justification, or no justification, which was worse. Victoria didn't seem to be thinking about this. Or if she was, she wasn't signaling it. She kept showing up, and the pretense that she was only there for the deck had grown so thin that neither of them felt the need to maintain it with any real effort. She stayed for dinner now, sometimes. Not every Saturday, but sometimes, and she and Logan and Lily ate at the kitchen table with the window open and the sound of the water carrying up from the cove, and Lily talked about school and dinosaurs, and Gerald, the Ice Age rock, and Victoria ate whatever Logan had made. He was an adequate cook, not a good one, but he'd stopped apologizing for it. And it felt like something. He couldn't name what it felt like. He was afraid to name it. Darnell came over for dinner one Thursday evening in early July, which he did a few times a month, and while Lily was in the other room watching a nature documentary, Darnell leaned across the kitchen table and said, without warming up to it, "The neighbor's coming over every Saturday. She helps with the deck. The deck that's almost done. It's not done yet." Darnell looked at him with the flat patience of a man who has known someone a long time and loves them too much to pretend. "Logan, what? When's the last time you actually wanted to spend a Saturday with someone?" Logan got up to refill his water. "I spend Saturdays with Lily." "That's not what I asked." He stood at the sink with his back to Darnell. The window over the sink looked out at the backyard and the deck, just barely visible in the porch light. He could see the new boards, the clean diagonal lines, the flashing set properly at the house junction. He could see how far it had come. "I don't know," he said. "I don't remember." "That's the point," Darnell said. Logan turned around. It's complicated. She's rich? That what you were going to say?" "I was going to say she's not looking for what I'd be offering." Darnell set his fork down. "Has she told you that?" A pause. "No." "Has she given you any indication of that?" Longer pause. "No." "Then what you've got there," Darnell said, picking his fork back up, "is an assumption you built yourself so you'd have somewhere to hide." Logan stared at him. "I'm not wrong," Darnell said. "You're annoying," Logan said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Lily shouted from the other room that the narrator had just said a blue whale's heart was the size of a small car, and she needed someone to come verify that this was real and not made up, and Logan went to do that, and the conversation in the kitchen didn't get finished. It didn't need to be finished. Darnell had already said the whole thing. The following Tuesday, Victoria texted him. This wasn't unusual. They texted occasionally during the week, practical things mostly, measurements or material questions, or once, memorably, a 45-minute back and forth about whether you could use outdoor-rated wood glue on a joint that would be partially exposed to weather, which he won on the technical points, but she made a more persuasive case on the aesthetics. But the message was different from those. "Do you ever take Lily out on the water? There's a guy at the marina who does sunset kayak tours. I was thinking about booking one, and it seems better with more people." He read it 3 times. Then he wrote back, "She's been on a kayak once. She was 6. She mostly complained about the life jacket." Victoria. Classic. Logan. "Are you asking us to come?" Victoria. "That's what I said, yes." Logan. "You didn't technically say that." Victoria. Logan. Logan. "Yeah, okay. What day?" He showed Lily the message that evening, not because he needed her opinion on whether to go, but because her opinion would be decisive and they both knew it. Lily read the message with the seriousness she brought to important communications, then handed the phone back. "She wants to hang out with us," Lily said. "She wants to go kayaking. Those are the same thing." He didn't argue with that because she was right, and arguing would just confirm it. "So we're going?" Lily said. "We're going," he said. Lily nodded and returned to Gerald, who was apparently undergoing some kind of symbolic repaint. She worked in silence for a moment, then said, without looking up, "She likes you, you know." Logan was pouring himself a glass of water. He stopped mid-pour. "She likes both of us." "She likes both of us," Lily agreed. "But she likes you specifically. Go to bed." "It's 6:30. Go to bed early." "Dad." He finished pouring the water and drank it and said nothing, and Lily returned to Gerald with the expression of someone who has made her point and is content to let it sit. He washed his glass, dried it, put it away. He stood at the kitchen window and looked at the strip of yard between his house and Victoria's, the fence line, the light in her back window that was usually on in the evenings now, reliable as weather. She likes you, you know. He knew. That was the problem. The kayak tour was on a Wednesday evening, which meant Logan had to leave the job site early, which he almost never did, and which his apprentice Marcus noticed with visible surprise and wisely chose not to comment on. They met Victoria at the marina at 6. She was already there when they arrived, standing on the dock with her hair loose and a jacket over her arm, looking at the water with the particular expression of someone who has been moving very fast for a very long time and has recently remembered that it's possible to stand still. Lily ran ahead, as Lily did everywhere. "Gerald says hi," she announced by way of greeting. "How's Gerald?" Victoria asked, with the complete seriousness the character required. "He's going through a lot right now." "Rocks often do," Victoria said. Logan caught up with them, and Victoria looked at him in that way she had, direct and unhurried, not giving anything away but not hiding anything either, and said, "You made it." "I made it," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I was coming. People say a lot of things." He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he said, "Nice evening," which was not an impressive sentence, and she smiled the way she smiled when he said something deliberately avoidant, the smile that told him she saw exactly what he was doing. The tour went out for 90 minutes, which was 90 minutes of Lily asking the tour guide questions faster than he could answer them, and the water very flat and copper-colored in the evening light, and the three of them in adjacent kayaks with Victoria in the middle because she'd gotten there first and claimed the spot, and Logan suspected she'd done it deliberately. He was not a man who thought about water as anything other than a practical fact. It was there. It did weather things. It made the summers shorter than the winters. But that evening, on the water, with the light doing what Maine summer light did in the evenings, he thought it looked like something worth recording. He didn't say that. He paddled and watched Lily interrogate the tour guide about harbor seals and felt, very quietly, something he hadn't felt in years. Something that had no convenient name and no good exit strategy. On the way back to the dock, in the last of the light, Victoria had matched his pace until they were side by side and slightly behind Lily, who was racing the tour guide in a competition she was definitely losing. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said. "Thank you for asking." "I almost didn't." He looked at her. The light was almost gone now, just a line of orange at the horizon. "Why?" She was quiet for 3 strokes. "Because asking meant I wanted you to say yes," she said. "And wanting things is a little—" She paused. "It's a little vulnerable." He looked out at the water. "Yeah," he said. "I know that feeling." She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. Lily reached the dock first and announced her victory loudly and inaccurately, and they climbed out and returned the kayaks and walked back to the parking lot in the cooled evening air, and Lily held Victoria's hand without asking permission, just reached up and took it as though it were a natural thing. Which it was. Which was the part that got to him. He drove home and put Lily to bed and sat in the kitchen in the dark for a long time, not drinking anything, not reading anything, just sitting. The light in Victoria's back window was on. He watched it for a while. Then he got up and went to bed, and he lay there listening to the sound of the water from the cove, and he thought about what it meant to want something and not know how to let yourself have it. He thought about it for a long time. He didn't arrive at anything he could use. He didn't sleep well that night or the night after. The kayak trip had done something he hadn't anticipated. Not changed anything exactly, but made something that had been abstract suddenly specific. The weight of Lily's hand in Victoria's. The way Victoria had said wanting things is a little vulnerable with the particular steadiness of someone who almost never admitted that kind of thing out loud. The copper light on the water. He kept returning to these details the way you return to a bruise, pressing on it to confirm it still hurts. It still hurt. He got through the week by working longer than he needed to. There was a kitchen renovation in a house up in Pembroke, a young couple who'd bought more house than they could afford and were trying to fix it incrementally, and Logan threw himself into the cabinet installation with the focused energy of a man trying to occupy every available corner of his own mind. Marcus, his apprentice, was 23 and observant in the unguarded way of someone who hadn't yet learned to pretend he wasn't, and on Thursday he looked at Logan across a row of cabinet doors and said, "You okay?" "Fine," Logan said. "You've measured that same cabinet 4 times." Logan looked at the measuring tape in his hand. He had, in fact, measured the same cabinet 4 times. "Checking my work," he said. Marcus nodded with the diplomatic neutrality of someone who had decided not to pursue this particular line of inquiry, and Logan put the tape away and picked up the level and told himself to get it together. He got it together, mostly. He finished the week, he picked Lily up from school, he made dinner, he read the animal book. He did all the things that constituted his life, and he did them competently, which was what he was good at. the functional surface of things, maintained regardless of what was happening underneath. Saturday arrived anyway, as Saturdays do. Victoria showed up at 8:30. Coffee. Pencil behind the ear. She was wearing a blue flannel he hadn't seen before, slightly worn at the cuffs in the way that meant it was a favorite rather than a new purchase, and she looked at the deck the way she always looked at it, with the assessing eye of someone tracking a project toward its conclusion. "We're close," she said. 2, maybe 3 more Saturdays. She nodded, and there was something in that nod, a small hesitation before it, that he might not have caught if he hadn't been paying the particular kind of attention he'd been paying all week. "Okay," she said. "What's first?" They worked the morning through the way they always did, and it was fine, and it was good, and it was exactly what it had always been. 2 people building something together in the particular quiet intimacy of shared physical work. And that was the problem, because it had always been this, from the very first Saturday. And he had spent all these weeks telling himself it was something else, something simpler and more manageable, and the kayak trip had taken that story away from him and left him without a replacement. Lily was at her friend Amara's house that day, which meant the yard was quieter than usual. Logan was aware of the absence. He was aware, too, of how differently the air felt without the buffer of his daughter's running commentary, without the easy triangulation that 3 people provided. It was just him and Victoria and the deck and the sound of the cove below the tree line, and the whole morning had a different quality to it, something more exposed. They didn't talk as much as usual, which wasn't uncomfortable but wasn't neutral either. He found himself choosing his words more carefully, measuring out sentences the way he measured lumber, checking twice before committing. She was doing the same thing, he thought. Or maybe he was projecting. He'd always been bad at knowing the difference. Around noon, they broke for lunch. Logan had made sandwiches inside, and he brought them out on a plate, and they sat on the back steps and ate in the thin summer shade. And the silence was the kind that had enough weight to it that one of them was going to have to say something real eventually. And they both knew it, and neither of them was in a hurry. Victoria was the one who broke it, but not with anything that sounded like she'd planned it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "What happened with Sarah?" He hadn't been expecting that. He took a bite of his sandwich and chewed it and thought about whether he wanted to answer honestly, and then he thought about all the versions of not honest he'd given other people over the last 3 years and how they'd all felt slightly worse each time. "She left," he said. "That's the short version." "What's the long version?" He looked at the yard, the strip of grass Lily had worn a path through with her constant back and forth between the steps and the fence. "She wasn't happy," he said. "And I think, if I'm fair about it, I wasn't easy to be with. I was working a lot. I was somewhere else in my head even when I was home. She tried to tell me that for about 2 years, and I kept hearing her and not doing anything about it, which is its own kind of not listening." He paused. "She met someone else. I don't think she set out to. I think she was looking for someone who was actually there, and I wasn't, and eventually she found him." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Do you blame her?" "No." He meant it. "I did for a while, but no, not anymore." "Do you blame yourself?" He ate the last of his sandwich and set the plate aside. "I think I made choices that made sense to me at the time and that I'd probably make differently now," he said. "Whether that's blame or just learning something the hard way. I'm not sure there's a clean line between those 2 things." She was looking at him with the focused attention she brought to things that mattered to her, and he held it this time, didn't look away. "Why are you asking?" he said. She looked at her sandwich. "Because I've been trying to understand you," she said. "And I think that's where you start, with what happened." "What are you trying to understand?" A beat. "Why you pull back every time something gets close." He felt the sentence land. He didn't say anything. "I'm not—" She stopped, restarted. "I'm not trying to push you. I know I do that sometimes. Push on things I should leave alone. I notice it, and I don't think you're doing it on purpose. I think it's just what you do." "What do I do?" His voice was even. He wasn't angry. He was listening with the specific, uncomfortable attention of someone hearing something accurate about themselves. "You get right up to the edge of something real, and then you say something that keeps it at arm's length. She finally looked back up at him, like you're managing the distance. He sat with that. The sound of the water came up from the cove, steady and indifferent the way the ocean always was, doing its thing regardless of what people were figuring out above it. Yeah, he said finally. That's probably fair. I'm not saying it to... I'm not criticizing you. I just... She exhaled. I've been spending a lot of time here, Logan, and I want to be honest about that. Not pretend it's all about the deck. The deck. He almost said something light about the deck, something that would slide the conversation sideways into easier territory. He felt the sentence forming, the familiar mechanism of it, and he stopped it. I know it's not all about the deck, he said. She looked at him steadily. Okay, she said, just that. Okay, he said back. They sat there for another minute, not quite doing anything with what they'd just said, and then Logan picked up the plates and went inside, and Victoria followed with the 2 cups, and they put things in the kitchen sink without discussing what had just happened, and then they went back outside and worked for another 3 hours. And it was the same as it always was, except that it wasn't, because something had been said that couldn't be unsaid, and both of them knew it, and somehow the afternoon was better for it rather than worse. When she left that evening, she said from the gate, "Same time next week?" "Same time next week," he said. She went home. He stood on the deck for a while, looking at the boards, feeling the slight give in the ones that still needed screwing down properly, thinking about what fair meant when you were applying it to yourself. He wasn't sure he'd ever been quite fair to himself. He'd been responsible, and he'd been reliable, and he'd been present in all the ways that could be measured and some of the ways that couldn't. But fair. Fair was something different. Fair meant seeing yourself without the softening lens of your own justifications, and that was a harder thing. He screwed down 2 more boards before it got dark enough to stop. The following week came and went, and the Saturday after that, and the deck moved steadily toward its conclusion with the same determination that had been largely absent from the project for the previous 3 years. Something had changed in the working rhythm after that afternoon on the steps. Not dramatically, not in a way that would have been visible to anyone watching from outside, but it was there. The careful distance he'd been maintaining had been named, and naming it had not made it disappear but had made it harder to maintain with a straight face. He caught himself, more than once, just watching her work. The way she held the drill like she'd been using one her whole life, which she hadn't. He remembered her, back in the first weeks, slightly tentative about the torque setting. The way she figured things out in silence and then just did them without announcing the figuring. The way she talked to Lily, not as a child to be managed, but as a person to be engaged, with patience that didn't look like patience because it was genuine rather than performed. He caught himself watching, and he didn't always immediately find something else to do, which was its own kind of small admission. The joke happened on a Saturday in late July, on an afternoon that should have been unremarkable. The deck was almost done. They'd been working on the railing that morning, pressure-treated posts, horizontal cable rail, the kind of clean, minimal look that Victoria had advocated for, and that Logan had agreed would be better than the traditional balusters he'd originally planned. It was fiddly work, the kind that required patience and exact measurements and the willingness to tear out and redo when something sat wrong, which they'd done twice already with the post spacing. Lily was in the yard, not the back steps this time. She'd graduated, by some unspoken agreement, to a lawn chair she'd dragged out from the garage and positioned with scientific precision in the exact spot of maximum supervision over the deck project. Gerald was on the armrest. She was drawing in the sketchbook but watching them, the way she always watched, with the peripheral awareness of someone gathering data for future reference. It was warm, genuinely warm in the way that Maine summers occasionally delivered, the specific dense heat that arrived without warning and felt like a reward for enduring 9 months of everything else. Logan had his shirt sleeves rolled up. Victoria had tied her flannel around her waist hours ago and was working in a white t-shirt with a waterproof marker clipped to the collar. They were measuring the cable spacing, which required one person on each side of the post and a certain amount of back and forth. 18 inches from the top, Logan said. Measured. Victoria marked it. 16 from there. Measured. Another mark. You know the code says 14 minimum. I know what the code says. I'm just pointing out you're going over code. Going over code on spacing is not the same as going under code on spacing. I'm aware of that. Then why are you pointing it out? Because you said 16 like it was written in stone somewhere, and I was curious if it was your personal preference or an actual specification. He looked at her over the post. Does it matter? It matters if I'm going to do it on my own porch someday. You're planning to build a deck. I'm planning to build a railing. The deck part seems manageable now. He almost said something about that. The now, the way it implied everything she'd learned in these months. But instead, he said, 16 gives you the right visual weight with this cable gauge. 14 would be technically correct and look slightly wrong. That's the most you've ever said about aesthetics. I have opinions about aesthetics. I just usually keep them to myself. Why? He thought about it. Because nobody usually asks. She held the measuring tape steady and looked at him for a moment and then looked back at the post, and he did the same. And they finished the measurement without saying anything else. But the air had a slightly different quality, the same way it did after the back steps conversation, a word that hadn't been said but was present anyway. The afternoon wore on. They broke for water. They finished the post on the far side and moved to the corner, which was the complicated one, the one where the railing had to turn without losing its tension. This required a discussion about hardware, and another about angles, and somewhere in the middle of the hardware discussion, Lily called out from her lawn chair that Gerald thought the corner post was in the wrong place. They both looked at the corner post. Gerald's not wrong, Victoria said. Logan pulled the post. It was a 1/4 inch off. He reset it, checked it with the level, and confirmed that the rock who remembered the Ice Age had better spatial instincts than he'd given him credit for. Thank Gerald, he said. He prefers a direct address, Lily said. Logan looked at the rock. The rock said nothing, as rocks did. Thank you, Gerald, he said. Lily nodded, satisfied. Victoria was laughing, the real laugh that changed her whole face, and Logan stood there with the post in his hands and felt something crack open in his chest that he'd been keeping sealed for quite a while. He felt it, recognized it, and then did what he always did. He picked up the next piece and kept working. But it stayed with him. It stayed with him through the rest of the afternoon, through the final measurements and the end-of-day cleanup, through the moment when they stood back and looked at the section of railing they'd completed, and it looked exactly right, clean and deliberate against the sky. That's good work, Victoria said. Yeah, Logan said. He wasn't talking about the railing. He wasn't entirely sure she was either. And then he still wasn't entirely sure why he said it, later, when he was trying to reconstruct the moment. Maybe the warmth of the afternoon had loosened something in him. Maybe the laughing had. Maybe it was just the particular, accumulated weight of all these Saturdays, pressing on a fault line he'd thought was solid. He said it as a joke. That was the thing he'd tell Darnell afterward, the detail he'd emphasize, as though it made it better or worse or different in some way. He'd meant it as a joke. He'd been reaching for something light, something that would put a safe frame around all the things that had been building without frames all summer. He'd been trying, in his particular and doomed way, to make something true sound like it wasn't. At this rate, he said, turning to stack the scrap lumber, not looking at her, you're never going to get married, Victoria. You spend every Saturday fixing a single dad's house. He said it, and then he waited for her to laugh, which was what was supposed to happen next. She didn't laugh. He turned around. She was standing with the drill in her hands, looking at him with an expression that was very still, the way her face went when she was processing something she hadn't expected. The afternoon light was on her. Behind her, Lily had gone very quiet in the lawn chair. The sketchbook lowered, and Gerald was sitting on the armrest at an angle that felt, somehow, like attention. Then Victoria looked down at the drill and back up at him, and she said, "Maybe you're the reason." 4 words. She said them quietly, without theater, without the particular performance of someone saying something significant. She just said them, the way she said things she meant, straight and without decoration. He stared at her. The world did not stop exactly. The sound of the cove was still there, the heat of the afternoon, the smell of cut wood and mineral spirits, and the faint brine of salt air coming up from the water. All of it continued. But something inside him went very still in a way that was nothing like stillness and everything like standing at the edge of something with no railing. He had meant the joke to push things back to a safe distance. What it had done was something entirely different. Lily made no sound from the lawn chair. Logan was aware of her, peripherally, in the way you're aware of a witness. He was aware that whatever happened in the next 15 seconds would be a thing his daughter saw, and that Lily saw everything and forgot nothing, and he had approximately no idea what to do with that. What he did, which was not the right thing, and which he knew immediately was not the right thing, was nothing. He looked at Victoria. She looked at him. The space between them had exactly the weight it should have if the 4 words meant what they sounded like they meant. And the weight was significant, and he felt it in his hands and his sternum and somewhere behind his eyes. And then he said, in a voice that came out slightly lower than normal, "Victoria, you don't have to say anything," she said. "Not hurt, just honest. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I know. She stopped. "I thought you should know, that's all." She set the drill on the sawhorse with a precision that was slightly careful, the movement of someone making sure their hands were doing something neutral. She looked at the railing section they'd completed and then back at him. "I'll see you next Saturday," she said. And she went through the gate, and the gate clicked behind her, and Logan stood in the backyard with the weight of 4 words and nothing useful to do with them. And after a moment he heard Lily, from the lawn chair, say, "Dad." "Yeah," he said. "You didn't say anything." "I know." A pause. "Gerald thinks that was a mistake." Logan looked at the rock. The rock offered nothing. The rock was 12,000 years old and had survived the Ice Age and had no patience for adults who didn't know what to do with good things when they appeared. "Gerald's probably right," Logan said. He picked up the remaining scrap lumber and stacked it against the fence, and the evening came in off the water the way it always did. And the light changed on the new railing, and none of it was the same as it had been before she said those 4 words, and Logan knew it, and knowing it was the part that scared him most. He spent the next 3 days operating on a tight internal loop that he couldn't quite break. He went to the job site. He measured things. He built things. He picked Lily up. He made dinner. He read the book. He did all of it with the surface competence that was his particular specialty, and underneath all of it those 4 words sat like something lodged, something he kept returning to involuntarily. "Maybe you're the reason." He turned the sentence over. He examined it from multiple angles the way you examine a joint before you commit to cutting, checking for weakness, for the place where it might fail under load. He thought about the ways it could be something smaller than it sounded. A passing honesty, the kind that gets said in warm afternoon light and doesn't necessarily mean everything it seems to mean. He thought about how maybe he'd misread the tone, overweighted the moment, assigned significance where there was just candor. He thought about this carefully and thoroughly and arrived every time at the same conclusion. He hadn't misread anything. He knew the difference between a casual admission and a loaded one. He'd felt the weight of the sentence in real time. He'd seen her face. "Maybe you're the reason." He called Darnell on Tuesday evening, which he almost never did on weekdays, which meant Darnell picked up on the first ring and said, without preamble, "What happened?" Logan told him. All of it. The joke, the words, the moment after, Lily's editorial in the lawn chair. He told it the way he told things to Darnell, flat and in sequence, without editorializing, because Darnell was one of the 2 or 3 people in his life he trusted enough to give the straight version. Darnell was quiet for a moment after he finished. Then he said, "And then you just stood there." "I said her name." "You said her name, and then you stood there." "Yeah." Another pause. "Logan, man." "I know. She told you. She straight up told you." "I know. And you—" "I know, Darnell." A long exhale. "Okay. So what are you going to do?" This was the question. This was the entire question. And Logan had been sitting with it for 3 days without getting any closer to an answer that didn't either require him to do something terrifying or accept that he was going to do nothing and live with what that felt like. "I don't know," he said. "That's not an answer." "I'm aware it's not an answer." "What's stopping you?" Darnell said. "And don't say the gap." Don't tell me about what she's worth and what you're worth and all that, because if she cared about that, she wouldn't be spending her Saturdays with sawdust in her hair. Logan sat in the kitchen in the dark. He'd turned the lights off without thinking, the way he sometimes did when he was thinking hard, as though darkness helped, and tried to locate the actual answer. Not the one he gave people. Not the one that sounded like wisdom or reasonable caution. The actual answer. "I'm scared," he said. It came out quieter than he intended. Darnell didn't say anything immediately, which was what Logan valued about him. He let the sentence exist in the space for a second before he responded. "Of what?" Darnell said. "Failing." "No." Logan stared at the ceiling. "That's the thing. It's not failure I'm scared of." "Then what?" He sat with the question. He sat with it for long enough that Darnell didn't push, just waited. Outside, the cove was doing its thing, the constant low conversation of water against rock. "Being loved," Logan said finally. "I think I'm scared of being loved." He heard Darnell breathe. "That doesn't make any sense," Darnell said. "I know." "You want me to tell you it makes sense?" "No, I know it doesn't." "It doesn't make sense, but I understand what you mean," Darnell said, "because if someone loves you, then you can lose it. And losing it is the one thing I know for sure how to survive," Logan said. "I've done it. I know the shape of it. I know how to get through a day when something's already gone." He stopped. "I don't know what to do with something that's still there. I don't have a lot of experience with that going well." Darnell was quiet for a moment. "Sarah left," he said. "Yeah." "And before Sarah?" Logan thought about it. His father, who had been present in body and largely absent everywhere else. His mother, who had done her best, which had been imperfect in specific and nameable ways. The two relationships before Sarah that had ended because he'd ended them, now that he was being honest. Both times in that particular preemptive way, both times at the exact moment things had started to get real. "Before Sarah, I left first," he said. The kitchen was very quiet. "So you've never really let anyone stay," Darnell said. "I've let Lily stay." "Lily didn't have a choice. You're her dad." Logan closed his eyes. "Yeah." "Logan, she's right next door. She spent her summer on your deck. She told you, in plain English. What else do you need?" He didn't have an answer for that. He had the fear, which was real, and the pattern, which was real, and somewhere underneath all of that, the very clear knowledge, not felt exactly, not yet, but known, that Victoria Ashford was not a thing that came along twice. "I have to figure out what I'm going to say to her," he said. "You probably should," Darnell said. "Next Saturday. Or sooner." "Next Saturday," Logan said. I need a few days to actually think it through." "Don't overthink it." "I'm going to overthink it." "I know you are. I'm just registering my objection." "Noted," Logan said. He sat in the dark kitchen for another hour after he hung up, and the cove went on doing what it did, and the light in Victoria's back window was on, the same as always, reliable as weather, and he looked at it for a while and thought about what it meant that he had come to rely on it, the simple, steady fact of it. The way it had stopped being the light in the neighbor's window and started being something he looked for at the end of every day without deciding to. He thought about that for a long time. Then he went to bed, and he slept better than he had all week because he had stopped pretending he didn't know what he needed to do, and not knowing had been doing most of the damage. He slept better that night, but the days between Tuesday and Saturday were not easy. There was a particular kind of difficulty in knowing what you needed to do and still having to wait to do it, not because the waiting was necessary, but because he was 32 years old and had spent enough time in his own company to understand that showing up to something this significant without thinking it through properly was how you made a mess of it. He'd made messes before. He knew what they looked like from the inside. The slow erosion of something that had started clean, the small evasions that compounded until the original thing was barely recognizable. He wasn't going to do that. So he waited, and he worked, and he thought, and he tried to do the thinking honestly. Wednesday was a full day at the Pembroke job, cabinet doors hung and hardware installed, and Logan worked with the particular physical absorption of a man who is using his hands to stay out of his own head, which worked for about 4 hours and then stopped working entirely somewhere around 2 in the afternoon, when Marcus handed him a hinge and he stood there holding it for a full 30 seconds without doing anything. "You're doing it again," Marcus said. "Doing what?" "The staring thing." Logan installed the hinge. "I'm thinking." "You've been thinking all week. Some problems take time." Marcus considered this with the philosophical tolerance of someone young enough to still believe that most problems resolved themselves if you waited long enough. "Is it a work problem?" "No." "Is it a Lily problem?" "No." "Then it's a woman problem," Marcus said, with the breezy confidence of someone who had not yet had enough woman problems to know that they were neither simple nor singular. "Install the next door," Logan said. Marcus installed the next door. He did not bring it up again, which was one of the things Logan genuinely liked about him. He pushed exactly once on personal things and then left them alone. It was a quality that took some people 30 years to develop. Marcus had arrived with it fully formed. Thursday, Logan took Lily to the bookstore in town because she had finished the animal book and declared it emotionally devastating in a good way and needed something new immediately. They spent an hour in the children's section while Lily applied her selection process, which involved reading the first page, the last page, and a random page from the middle, a methodology she had developed independently and which Logan had to admit seemed to work. And he sat in the chair next to the shelf and watched her move between books with the brisk certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. He thought, watching her, about what Darnell had said. "You've never really let anyone stay." The words had been sitting with him since Tuesday, not with the sharp discomfort of something new, but with the dull recognition of something true that he'd managed to avoid saying to himself for a long time. He thought about his ex-girlfriends before Sarah, Claire, who had been patient and warm, and who he had ended things with 3 weeks after she said she loved him for the first time. Mara, who had wanted to move in together and who he had told, with genuine-sounding reasons, was not ready. Both times he had believed his own justifications. Both times the reasons had been real enough to be convincing. Both times the actual reason had been this: that the moment someone loved him, he became acutely aware of all the ways they might stop. He'd never applied that analysis cleanly to himself before. He'd known he had a pattern, in the vague way that people know they have patterns. You could see the shape of it if you squinted, but close up it looked like individual reasonable choices rather than a systematic behavior. Darnell's question had made him look at it straight on for the first time, and what he saw was not flattering. He had been performing unavailability for so long he'd mistaken it for his actual nature. Lily came back with 2 books, held them both out, and said, "I can only get one." "Which one?" He looked at them. One was about a girl who solves mysteries. One was about a girl who can talk to sea creatures. What did the middle pages say? Both were good. Then get the sea creature one. You like the water. She considered this as a logical framework and accepted it. She tucked the book under her arm and said, without preamble, "Have you talked to Victoria?" He looked at her. "About what?" Lily gave him the look, the one that was her mother's eyes with his stubbornness behind them. "You know about what?" "Have I talked to Victoria about Gerald's emotional state?" "Dad?" "The migration patterns of rocks?" "Dad?" He got up and ruffled her hair, which she tolerated with minimal complaint, and they went to pay for the book, and she let the subject drop. But she let it drop in the particular way that meant she was storing it rather than releasing it, and he knew he hadn't heard the last of it. Friday evening, he sat on the back steps by himself with a beer he mostly didn't drink, and he looked at the deck in the late light, and he ran through what he wanted to say. Not the exact words. He'd never been good with scripts, but the shape of it, the honest architecture of it, what he'd been doing, why he'd been doing it, what he understood now that he hadn't understood at the time. He wanted to apologize, a real apology, not the kind that made the other person do the work of reassuring you it was fine. He wanted to ask her the question he'd failed to ask on the afternoon she said those 4 words, when he'd stood there like someone waiting to be told what to do. He ran through it, not the exact words, just the shape. The beer went warm and he poured it out in the garden and went inside, and the light in Victoria's back window was on, and he thought, one more day. One more day turned out to be the longest 24 hours he'd spent since Lily had been sick with pneumonia at age 6, which was the last time Logan had experienced time as a genuinely hostile force. He was in the backyard before 7 on Saturday. He wasn't sure why exactly. The deck wasn't going anywhere. Victoria wasn't coming until 8:30. There was nothing to do before she arrived that couldn't have waited until she arrived. But lying in bed staring at the ceiling wasn't working, and making breakfast had already been done. And Lily was still asleep, and the deck was there, and the morning air was cool and salt-edged, and he needed something to do with his hands that was not the inside of his own mind. So he went out and looked at the deck. It was almost done. One section of railing on the far side still needed its cable tensioned and the hardware tightened, and there was a corner board he'd been unhappy with for a week that needed to come up and be reset. And then there was the finish work. The sanding, the sealing, the details that took time precisely because they were the last things, and the last things always felt both close and endless. But structurally, fundamentally, the thing was built. It was real. It had gone from a stack of warped lumber and a coffee can of rusting screws to something you could stand on and trust your weight to. He stood on it. He trusted his weight to it. It held. 3 years, he thought. 3 years of every next weekend, and it had taken a woman from next door and a borrowed power drill and 12 Saturdays to get here. He was still thinking about that when the gate opened, and he turned around, and Victoria was there with the coffee. She was wearing the blue flannel again, the favorite one. Her hair was down. She looked at him across the yard with an expression he couldn't read at that distance. Careful, maybe. Unsure of the ground. He understood that. He'd made the ground unsure. She crossed the yard and held out a cup, and he took it, and they stood there for a moment in the early morning, not saying anything, the kind of nothing that had too much in it. "Victoria," he said. "Logan, I owe you an apology." She looked at her cup. "You don't—" "I do." He kept his voice level. "You said something honest to me last Saturday, and I just stood there. That wasn't—" He stopped, tried again. "That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't honest on my part, which is worse." She was quiet. "I've been running the same play for a long time," he said. "Somebody gets close, and I find a way to make sure they can't get any closer. I don't always know I'm doing it. Sometimes I tell myself it's reasonable, but what I did last Saturday wasn't reasonable. I dressed up something real as a joke because I was scared, and when you answered it straight, I didn't have the guts to answer back." He exhaled. "That was a failure. I wanted you to know I know that." She looked up at him. Her expression had shifted. Less careful, more open. "Okay," she said. "Okay meaning you accept the apology?" "Okay meaning I hear you." She tilted her head just slightly. "What were you scared of?" He'd thought about how to answer this. He'd thought about it since Tuesday, refined it, stripped out the parts that were evasion dressed as self-awareness. What he had left was not complicated. "You," he said. "Not in a bad way, just what you are to me has gotten real enough that losing it would hurt in a specific way. And I've gotten very good at making sure things don't get that real." She was looking at him with the direct, unhurried attention that was one of the things he'd noticed first about her, back when she was standing on her porch with the wrong screwdriver, an instruction she was determined to beat. "And now?" she said. "Now I'm asking," he said. "When you said maybe I was the reason, did you mean it?" She didn't look away. "I did." Something he'd been bracing against for 3 years came loose in his chest. "Tell me what you meant," he said. Because he needed to hear it, not the abbreviated version, not the diplomatic version. He needed to hear it and actually let it land rather than holding it at the careful distance he'd been maintaining. She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating. He'd learned to tell the difference between her hesitations, which were rare, and her silences, which were how she thought. This was a silence. "I moved to Harrow Cove because I needed to stop," she said. "I'd been going for 8 years straight, and everything about my life was something I'd chosen deliberately, except for the fact that I was lonely, which I'd just let happen by accident, the way you let something happen when you're too busy to notice it." She looked at the deck. "I thought I'd take a year, live somewhere small, figure out what I actually wanted that I hadn't been giving myself time to want." "And?" he said. "And then I borrowed a drill from the man next door," she said. "And he gave me the right bit and explained the difference between drywall and plaster and didn't make a thing of himself about knowing more than me. And I went home and hung the curtain rods and thought—" She stopped, looked at him. I thought, that man doesn't know what he's doing to people. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I genuinely don't, he said. I know you don't. That's the thing. She set her cup on the sawhorse, the same way she always did, making space for her hands. Every reason I came over here was real. The deck help was real. The coffee was real. I'm not the kind of person who pretends to want things I don't want. But none of those reasons were the whole reason, and I think you know that. Yeah, he said. I know that. The whole reason was that I wanted to be here. She said it simply, without apology. With you and with Lily, this... She gestured, a small movement that took in the yard and the deck and the early morning and all 12 Saturdays compressed into it. This is the best part of my week, every week. And I know that probably sounds strange coming from someone who runs a company and travels and has... It doesn't sound strange, he said. She stopped. It doesn't, he said again. I understand it. He understood it the way you understand something you've felt yourself but not named. Something that makes more sense once someone else says it out loud. This has been the best part of my week, too. She looked at him. He set his own cup down on the sawhorse beside hers. I'm not good at this, he said. Just for the record. I'm better at building things than I am at saying things. And I have a kid and a house that needs work, and I drive a truck with magnetic letters that I keep meaning to replace, and I probably... He stopped himself. He could feel the hedge coming, the self-deprecating, preemptive diminishment he used to make himself a smaller ask. I'm trying not to do the thing where I list my limitations as a way of talking myself out of asking for something. Victoria's mouth curved just slightly. Okay, she said. What are you asking? He met her eyes. I'm asking if you want to stop pretending the deck is the reason you come over, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The deck is almost done anyway, she said. Yeah. So the pretense had a limited shelf life regardless. I know. For what it's worth, she said, I stopped pretending the deck was the reason about 6 Saturdays ago. He felt something in him settle, the particular settling of a thing that has been held at tension for too long finally being allowed to rest. 6 Saturdays ago, he repeated. The mineral spirits, she said. He thought about that afternoon, her arm in his hands, the 20 seconds he'd spent very carefully not thinking. Yeah, he said. Okay, that's fair. She laughed. The real one, the one that changed her whole face. And he felt it like something physical, a warmth that started in his chest and went somewhere he hadn't felt warmth in a long time. He didn't try to redirect it this time. He let it be there. So, she said. So, he said. They stood in the backyard in the early morning with their coffee cups on the sawhorse and 3 years of his particular caution between them, and neither of them moved for a moment. And then he stepped toward her, and the distance between them was different, and she looked at him with that direct and unhurried regard, and he said, Is this all right? Yes, she said. He kissed her, not with the careful tentativeness of someone performing a gesture, but with the specific present weight of a man who has finally stopped managing the distance and just arrived. She kissed him back, and it was not a perfect moment in the way that movies make moments perfect. His nose bumped hers slightly at the start, and she made a small sound that was half surprise and half laugh, and neither of them cared. When they pulled back, she was still smiling. Your nose, she said. I know, sorry. Don't be. She looked at him. Hi, she said. Hi, he said back. They stood like that for a moment, slightly ridiculous, in the backyard with the deck between them and the morning coming in off the water. And it was nothing like the version of this Logan had been afraid of. It was smaller and stranger and more specific, and it was, he understood, exactly right. Not perfect, just right. From upstairs through the open kitchen window, they heard Lily. The particular sound of her on the stairs, 2 feet at a time, always, with no patience for alternating. And then the screen door, and then she appeared on the back steps and looked at them in the yard. She looked at them for 3 full seconds. Then she said, Finally. Logan pressed his fingers briefly to the bridge of his nose. Good morning, Lily. Gerald said it would happen, she said. I didn't think he was right, but he was. We're going to work on the deck now, Logan said. Okay. She sat on the steps, reached back through the screen door for Gerald, who had apparently been waiting, and placed him on the armrest with the ceremony of someone positioning an honored guest. He wants to watch, she said. He's going to be disappointed, Logan said. We're just tensioning cable today. He finds all aspects of the deck equally meaningful, Lily said. Victoria laughed again. She looked at Logan, and there was something in her eyes that was warm and slightly overwhelmed and completely honest, and he held it this time, let himself hold it without deflecting, let the warmth of it exist. Okay, Gerald, he said. Make yourself comfortable. Check. They worked through the morning, and it was different. Not dramatically different. They were still two people with tools doing the same things they'd been doing for 12 Saturdays. But the carefulness was gone, not replaced by anything excessive, no performance of closeness, nothing that would have made Lily roll her eyes or the work suffer. Just the careful distance was gone, and in its place was the ease of two people who had stopped spending energy on maintenance of a thing that didn't need to be maintained. He caught himself talking differently. Not about different things, but with less editing. He said what he thought about the cable tension, about the finish coat he was planning, about the corner board he still needed to reset, and he asked what she thought, and she told him, and they argued about the corner board for 10 minutes with the specific pleasure of two people who genuinely enjoy being right and genuinely don't mind being wrong. She was right about the corner board. He pulled it and reset it and acknowledged this without ceremony, and she did not make a thing of it, which was one of the qualities he'd appreciated in her from the beginning, and which looked from this angle like something he intended to appreciate for a significant length of time. Lily went inside for lunch and they kept working, and in the particular quiet of early afternoon, Victoria said, without looking up from the cable she was tensioning, I should tell you something. He looked at her. I have a board meeting in Boston in 3 weeks, she said. I'll be gone for a week. Maybe 10 days. Okay, he said, and there's a project in Denver that's going to need me on site sometime in September. Probably 2 weeks. He looked at the cable terminal he was tightening. Okay, he said again. I want to be clear about what I'm saying, she said. She stopped working and looked at him directly. I'm not going anywhere permanently. I'm not. But my life has pieces in it that take me away from here sometimes, and I wanted you to know that before you... She paused. Before we were further in. Because I don't want to be a surprise to you. I've had enough of being a surprise to people. He set down the tightening tool. Victoria, he said, I know it's a lot to... I'm not looking for uncomplicated, he said. If I wanted uncomplicated, I'd have stayed where I was. Uncomplicated is a truck with magnetic letters and a deck that doesn't get finished. He looked at her. I'm aware that you have a life. I have a life too. Mine has an 8-year-old in it who has opinions about rocks. None of that is a disqualification. She studied him. I know what I'm doing, he said. Maybe for the first time in a while, I actually know what I'm doing. She held his gaze for a moment, looking for the hedge, the careful qualifier. She didn't find one. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She picked up the tightening tool and went back to the cable, and he did the same, and they worked through the early afternoon with the sound of the cove and the sun on the new boards, and it was a quiet that had a completely different quality than the quiet of the last 12 Saturdays. Not better, exactly. Just honest. The difference between a room with the windows open and a room with the windows closed. Same room, different air. Lily came back around 2 with Gerald and a plate of crackers she'd assembled without being asked and presented to both of them without explanation, which was her way of contributing to situations she approved of. Thank you, Victoria said. Gerald helped, Lily said, and returned to the steps. Logan looked at the plate of crackers. He looked at his daughter on the steps. He looked at Victoria, who was eating a cracker with the particular expression of someone trying not to look too moved by a small gesture and not entirely succeeding. He thought about what Darnell had said. She told you, in plain English. He thought about all the ways he might have missed this. The morning he might have gone inside instead of crossing the strip of grass. The Saturday he might have said no to the offer of help. The 200 small moments between then and now, when the careful, practiced distance in him had almost won. It hadn't won. He picked up a cracker. He looked at the deck. at the clean diagonal boards and the cable railing and the properly seated flashing, and the near-finished reality of a thing he'd been avoiding for 3 years, and thought, this is what it looks like when you don't leave first. It looked like a Saturday in late summer with sawdust on his boots and crackers on a plate, and a woman he trusted beside him and his daughter on the back steps with a 12,000-year-old rock named Gerald. It looked, in other words, nothing like what he'd been afraid of, and everything like what he'd been building toward without knowing it. The deck was finished on a Saturday in late August, 3 weeks after the morning with the coffee and the nose bump and Lily's verdict of finally. Logan drove the last screw at 11:15 in the morning, and the sound it made going in was no different from the sound of the 700 screws before it, but he sat back on his heels and looked at the board for a long moment anyway, because some things deserve a second to be acknowledged, even when they don't announce themselves with any particular drama. Victoria was beside him. She'd been tensioning the last of the cable on the far railing section while he finished the decking, and she came around the corner and saw him crouched there and understood, without being told, what the moment was. "That's it?" she said. "That's it." She looked at the deck. He looked at the deck. The diagonal boards ran clean from the house to the outer frame. The cable railing caught the late summer light and held it, and the whole thing had the particular quality of something built to last. Not showroom perfect. There were imperfections in it he could catalog precisely. A board in the northeast corner that ran a hair off parallel. A post that had given him trouble twice before finally cooperating. The evidence of decisions revised, but solid, considered, real. "It's good," Victoria said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Lily appeared on the back steps. She had developed, over the course of the summer, an almost supernatural ability to detect significant moments, and stood looking at the completed deck with the serious assessment of someone whose supervision had contributed materially to this outcome. "It's done," she said. "It's done, Bug." She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Gerald on the armrest of the lawn chair. Then she said, "Gerald says it looks better than he thought it would." "Tell Gerald he's been saying that about people all summer," Victoria said. Lily considered this. "He knows," she said, and went inside. Logan stood up, his knees registering the complaint they always registered after time spent crouching on wood. He was 32, not 62, but carpentry had a way of making the body keep an honest accounting. And he and Victoria stood side by side looking at the thing they'd built. He had a feeling he didn't try to name right away. Not happiness exactly, though it was that. Not relief, though it was that too. It was closer to the feeling of a room after a window's been opened. The air changed, the quality of the space different, something that had been sealed for a long time finally breathing. 3 years. He'd postponed this project for 3 years and built it in one summer, and both of those facts were true. And he understood now that they were the same fact from different directions. He'd postponed it because some part of him hadn't been ready to finish it, hadn't been ready to close out the chapter the deck represented, the optimistic version of himself who'd bought this house and believed the future was worth building toward. And he'd finished it this summer because that version had come back in a form he hadn't expected, carried in on a borrowed power drill, in 12 Saturdays and 4 words on a warm afternoon. "What do you want to do with it first?" Victoria asked. "What do you mean?" "The deck. It's done. What do you want to do on it first?" He thought about this. "Probably dinner," he said. "A real one, out here." "I'll make something," she said. "You don't have to—" "Logan." She looked at him sideways. "Let me make dinner." He let her make dinner. He was working on that. The letting people do things, the not reflexive declining of gestures, the recognition that accepting help was not the same as incurring a debt. It didn't come naturally. He was a man who had spent 3 years being the only person responsible for his own household, and the musculature of self-sufficiency didn't relax on command, but he was working on it. "What are you going to make?" he said. "Something that requires actual ingredients. Go pick Lily up. I'll be over by 6. She went through the gate, and he stood on the finished deck alone for a minute, just standing on it, feeling the boards under his boots. Solid, not going anywhere. He went to get Lily. The dinner was pasta, which Victoria made from scratch, Not the box kind, actual pasta, rolled out on Logan's kitchen counter with a rolling pin she'd brought from her own house because his, she informed him without judgment, was inadequate. Lily sat on the counter watching the process with the concentrated interest she brought to anything that involved transformation, the way one material became another. "How do you know how thin?" Lily asked. "You can tell by how it looks," Victoria said, "and by feel, eventually, but mostly it's just doing it enough times that you stop second-guessing." "How many times?" "Before I stopped second-guessing?" Victoria considered. "Probably 40. The first 15 were terrible." "What did you do with them?" "Ate them anyway. Bad pasta is still pasta." Lily thought about this with the philosophical openness of someone for whom most lessons about persistence resonated through food. "Dad makes the same 3 dinners," she said. "I make 5 dinners," Logan said from where he was setting the outdoor table through the open window. "Name them," Lily said. "Chicken, pasta, tacos, the soup thing, and eggs." "Eggs isn't dinner." "Eggs is absolutely dinner." "It's breakfast food." "Food doesn't have fixed citizenship, Lily." Lily turned back to Victoria. "He thinks eggs is dinner," she said, as though filing a report. "Some of the best meals I've ever had were eggs," Victoria said diplomatically. "See?" Logan said. "She's being nice," Lily said. "I actually mean it," Victoria said. Lily looked at her, weighing sincerity. Then, "Okay, but the pasta is better." "The pasta is better," Victoria agreed. Logan set the last fork down and stood back and looked at the table on the finished deck, the one he'd found in the garage, a folding table he rarely used, covered with a cloth Lily had selected from the linen closet with the gravity of someone choosing something meaningful, and thought that it looked like something. Not fancy, just occupied. The way spaces are supposed to look when people actually live in them. Victoria brought the pasta out in the big pot, which was an exercise in logistics through the back door, and Lily carried the bread, and Logan poured the drinks. Water for Lily, wine for the adults, the decent bottle he'd bought at the store in town, and felt slightly self-conscious about buying, and then felt self-conscious about feeling self-conscious. And they sat down at the folding table on the finished deck in the last of the August evening light. It was not a perfect dinner. The pasta was slightly oversalted, which Victoria acknowledged without making a drama of it. The bread was from the store and not from her oven, and she mentioned this with the particular mild regret of someone with standards they don't always meet. Lily knocked over her water glass in the first 10 minutes, and while it was being mopped up, she knocked over the bread basket, and the bread went on the deck, which she picked up and brushed off and ate without ceremony. Logan looked at this and felt something so ordinary and so good that it caught him off guard, the specific sweetness of a thing you don't recognize as precious until it's right in front of you. They ate. Lily talked about a book report she had to do in September, and the ongoing saga of Gerald's identity, and a new development in the stone mythology involving a smaller rock named Dorothea, who had apparently arrived via migration and was creating political complications. Victoria asked questions about Dorothea with the focus of someone genuinely tracking a developing narrative. Logan ate his pasta and watched the two of them and thought about the word family, which was a word he hadn't applied to any combination of people other than himself and Lily in 3 years. He thought about it. He sat with it. He didn't push it away. When Lily went inside to wash up for bed, leaving Logan and Victoria at the table with the candles he'd found in a kitchen drawer and lit without making a decision about it, the evening had gone quiet the way Maine evenings went quiet, sudden and complete. The insects, the water, the air cooling fast off the ocean. "Thank you for tonight," Logan said. Victoria tilted her wine glass. "You provided the deck." "You provided everything else." "The deck was 60% of the effort." "That's not—" He looked at her. "That's not what I mean." She held his gaze. She knew what he meant. She always knew what he meant, which was something he'd gotten used to faster than he'd expected to. The particular relief of being read correctly. "I know," she said. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the railing, the cable catching the candlelight, and the yard beyond it, and the strip of darkness where the cove was. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Okay." "About this summer." He paused, tried to find the way into what he wanted to say. I've been thinking about the fact that I almost didn't cross the yard that first day. When I saw you with the wrong screwdriver, I almost just went inside. But you didn't, she said. But I didn't. He turned the wine glass in his hand. I've been trying to figure out what made the difference, and I don't have a clean answer. He stopped. I think I was tired. Tired of going inside. Tired of having things that were almost finished and never quite getting there. He looked at the deck. And something in me he searched for the word. Ready. In a way I didn't know I was. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I think that's how it usually works, she said. You don't feel ready and then you find out you were because of what happened next. Not very comforting when you're standing on the other side of it. No, she said. It isn't. A pause. I was scared too, moving here. I kept telling myself it was a practical decision. I needed to slow down. I needed a base outside the city. All true things. She looked at her glass. But also I was 30 years old and I didn't have a single person in my life who knew what I had for breakfast. And that was starting to weigh on me in a way I couldn't rationalize away anymore. And now? He said. She smiled, not the public one, the real one. Now Lily tells you if she thinks my eggs are dinner appropriate. So. He laughed. Actually laughed, the kind that happens before you decide to. She watched him laugh with an expression he'd seen a handful of times, something warm and slightly private, the look of someone storing a moment. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and she turned her hand over and held his, and they sat like that on the finished deck in the cooling evening and didn't say anything for a while. This was another thing he'd gotten used to faster than expected, the silences that didn't need filling. He'd forgotten that silences could be like that. He'd spent 3 years filling every quiet with some task, some next thing, some reason to keep moving, and it turned out that some of what he'd been running from was the absence of someone to be quiet with. The back door opened and Lily came out in her pajamas. The ones with the foxes on them, slightly too small now. She'd refused to let him donate them, carrying Gerald. I want to say goodnight on the deck, she said. It's your deck too, Logan said. She stood on the new boards in her fox pajamas and looked at the railing and the yard and the dark line of the cove beyond the fence, with Gerald in both hands, and she had the expression she sometimes got that made Logan's heart do something structurally unsound. The expression of a child encountering something she doesn't quite have words for yet. It's good, she said finally. Yeah, Logan said. She looked at Victoria. Are you going to be here tomorrow? Victoria glanced at Logan. He gave her nothing, kept his face neutral, which she had identified early on as the face he made when he was leaving something genuinely up to her. If you want me to be, Victoria said. Lily thought about this with the gravity it deserved. Gerald wants you to be, she said. Then I'll be here. Lily nodded, satisfied, and came over and hugged Victoria. Not the polite, glancing hug of a child performing affection, but the full-weight, unself-conscious hug of a child who means it. And then she came around the table and hugged Logan, and he held her for a second longer than usual, pressing his chin to the top of her head, breathing in the particular smell of his daughter, shampoo, and something that was just her, that he'd been breathing in for 8 years. Love you, Bug, he said. Love you, she said, and went inside. The door clicked behind her. Logan and Victoria sat in the quiet for a while, and the candles burned, and the cove did its thing below the tree line. She's going to be remarkable, Victoria said. She already is, he said. The week Victoria went to Boston was the first real test. He'd known it was coming. She'd told him 3 weeks out, and then again the week before, and he'd said each time that it was fine, which it was, and he'd meant it, which he had. But knowing and experiencing are different countries, and when he came home Monday evening and the light in the back window of her house wasn't on, he stood in his kitchen for a moment and felt the absence with a specificity that surprised him. He was not, he told himself, a man who fell apart when someone left for a business trip. He was also not a man who had let someone matter this much in a long time, so there was a learning curve involved. She texted him from Boston that first night, late. Made it. Hotel room is nicer than my house, which is annoying. How's Lily? He texted back. Lily's fine. Gerald has a new rock friend. Dorothea is causing problems. Victoria. What kind of problems? Logan. Political. Lily hasn't fully explained the situation. I've learned not to ask too many questions. Victoria. Smart. How are you? He looked at the question for a moment. There were several ways to answer it. The automatic fine, the slightly more honest, okay, the thing he was actually thinking. He went with the thing he was actually thinking. Weird. Your light's not on. I didn't realize I'd been using it as a landmark. A pause on her end. Then, I'm going to think about that for a while. Logan. Sorry, is that... Victoria. No, don't apologize. I like it. He put the phone down and finished the dishes and checked on Lily and read 2 chapters of the new book. She'd moved on from the sea creature story to something about a girl who builds robots, and she was reading ahead of him now, which she'd started doing when she was 7, and which always filled him with a feeling he couldn't quite categorize. Somewhere between pride and the particular bittersweet of watching someone outgrow their need for you in one specific way. And he went to bed with the phone on the charger and slept, mostly. They texted every day that week. Not constantly. She had meetings, he had the Pembroke job, they both had the actual texture of their actual lives happening. But enough. She sent him a photo of the hotel breakfast, and he sent one back of the eggs he'd made for dinner, and she texted, "Eggs is dinner." And he replied, "Thank you." And she replied, "Lily is still wrong." And he replied, "Don't tell her that." And she replied, "She already knows I think so." And she respects the disagreement. On Wednesday she called, which they hadn't planned. He was in the garage sorting through lumber when his phone buzzed, her name on the screen, and he picked up and said hello, and her voice came through the way it did, direct and warm, slightly tired at the edges. "I'm between meetings," she said. "I have 12 minutes. I just wanted to hear your voice. Is that—" "Yeah," he said. "It's good." She told him about the meeting, the board members, the project they were arguing about, the particular frustration of being the person in the room who knew the most about something and still having to convince everyone else of it. He listened, leaning against the workbench with the phone against his ear, and offered observations where they seemed useful and otherwise just let her talk, which he'd figured out was sometimes the most useful thing. "You're easy to talk to," she said at one point. "People don't usually say that. People don't usually give you the chance." He turned that over. "Yeah," he said. "That's probably accurate." Logan. I'm glad you crossed the yard." He looked at the garage ceiling. "Me too," he said. She had to go back to her meeting. He went back to the lumber. The evening was easier than Monday had been, and Tuesday had been easier than Monday, and by Friday he'd made his peace with the 10 days, which was a small but genuine improvement over the man who had arranged his entire life to make sure he wouldn't have to miss anyone. She came back on a Sunday. He didn't make a plan for it. They hadn't discussed what Sunday would look like, whether she'd come over or just come home and rest, and he deliberately didn't engineer anything because one of the things he was practicing was not controlling the shape of moments to keep himself comfortable. He was in the backyard at 4 in the afternoon, doing the finish sanding on the deck that he'd been meaning to get to all week, when he heard the car in her driveway. He kept sanding. He heard the car door. He kept sanding. He heard the front door of her house, and then, about 7 minutes later, the back gate. He looked up. She was in travel clothes, hair slightly flattened from whatever combination of planes and cars it had taken to get here. And she was carrying nothing because she'd left her bags inside. And she walked across the yard, and he stood up, and she walked into him, and he put his arms around her, and that was it. No announcement. No navigation of what the gesture meant or whether it was the right one. She was tired. He could feel it in the way she leaned, not collapse, Victoria didn't collapse, but the particular letdown of someone who has been holding themselves assembled for 10 days and can now stop. "Hi," he said, into her hair. "Hi," she said, into his shoulder. They stood like that for a minute, on the deck, in the afternoon. He was aware of the sandpaper still in his hand. He didn't do anything about it. "How was the drive?" he said. "Long. There was construction outside Portland." "There's always construction outside Portland." "Why does anyone live outside Portland?" "Main question." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. She didn't move, and he didn't move, and after a moment he said, "Lily's at Amara's. She'll be back at 6. Okay. I was going to make tacos. Good. Victoria. I'm glad you're back. She lifted her head and looked at him with the direct, unhurried regard that had been the first thing he'd noticed about her, standing on her porch with the wrong screwdriver. And it was the same as it had always been. Nothing performed in it, nothing withheld. I know, she said. I could tell. The text about the landmark. That was very revealing, yes. He felt his face do something he would not have called a smile if pressed, but which was functionally indistinguishable from one. Do you want coffee? He said. I want to sit on the deck, she said. I haven't finished the sanding. I don't care about the sanding. They sat on the deck. He made coffee anyway because it was 4 in the afternoon, and they were people who drank coffee at 4 in the afternoon, and she sat in the chair that had become, by accumulation of habit, her chair. And he sat in his, and the cove was doing its thing below the tree line. And the late summer light was the particular gold that said the season was ending, that fall was coming the way it came here, fast and complete and without apology. He looked at the light on the water and thought about the word landmark, about how you could navigate by someone without realizing you were doing it, how something could organize your sense of place and direction before you'd formally acknowledged its existence. He'd been navigating by her for a while. He understood that now. What? Fall arrived and did not ruin anything, which he had half expected it to. He'd had a formless anxiety about the end of summer, the end of the deck project, the end of the season, the end of the conditions that had brought them together, as though what they had were a weather phenomenon, a specific pressure system that required warmth and long days, and the particular suspended quality of summer to sustain itself, as though the natural world transitioning into something harder would expose the thing between them as seasonal. It didn't. What fall brought instead was a different version of the same thing. October meant Lily's school had a parents' weekend, and Victoria came and sat next to Logan in the small gymnasium chairs that were built for people half his size, and watched Lily's class perform a short play about the water cycle. And afterward, Lily found them in the crowd and delivered a complete review of her own performance. What had gone well, what had gone less well, the moment when the kid playing evaporation had forgotten his lines and she had quietly fed them to him from her own position as precipitation, which she felt had been her real contribution to the production. That was generous of you, Victoria said. He would have stood there forever, Lily said. Still, it was kind. Lily considered the distinction between generosity and pragmatism, filed it for later, and moved on to the question of whether they were getting pizza because she had earned pizza. They got pizza. November meant the Denver trip, 2 weeks, which was harder than Boston because 2 weeks was longer, and because by November Logan had stopped pretending to himself that her absence was neutral. He drove Lily to school in the mornings and came home to a quiet house and worked and made dinner and helped with homework and did all the things that were the daily infrastructure of his life. And he did them fine. And the light in her window was off. And he noted it the way you note something missing, not with drama, just with the particular clarity of absence. She called more from Denver than she had from Boston. Not every day, but most evenings, and the calls were longer. They talked about the project she was managing, the team on the ground, a difficult subcontractor situation she was navigating with the particular patients that didn't look like patients he'd come to recognize as one of her qualities. He told her about the Pembroke kitchen, finished at last, and about a new job in Harrow Cove, a porch on an old Victorian he'd been interested in for years, and about Lily's new rock, Hendrix, who had apparently arrived under unclear circumstances and whose loyalties were disputed. One evening she said, without particular preamble, I think I'm going to reduce my travel next year. He waited. I've been thinking about it for a while, she said. It's not about, I'm not going to stop working. That's not who I am. But there are things I've been doing in person that could be done differently. And there are things I've been putting off because I was always about to leave. And I'm tired of being always about to leave. Is that a decision you've made? He said carefully. Or something you're thinking through? Both, she said. But mostly the first one. Okay, he said. Okay meaning you heard me, or okay meaning I'm glad, he said. But I want you to be clear that you're not making that decision for me. Make it if it's what you want. Don't make it as a concession. A pause on her end. You know something? She said. What? You're much better at this than you think you are. He said nothing. The relationship thing, she said. You act like you've got nothing to offer and you've been getting it right most of the time since August. He sat with that. He didn't deflect it. That was progress. I have an 8-year-old who corrects my dinner opinions, he said. I've had good training. She laughed. He filed the sound. She came back from Denver on a Thursday. By December, the rhythm of things had solidified into something he could feel the shape of. Not a routine exactly, not the scheduled predictability of something managed, but something organic and reliable, the way a path forms through a field because people keep walking the same way. Not because someone told them to, but because it makes sense. She ate dinner with them 3 or 4 nights a week. She sat at the kitchen table that was not large enough for 3 people with any real comfort, which meant that Lily sat at the end and Victoria and Logan sat across from each other with slightly less room than was ideal. And nobody addressed this because nobody wanted to buy a bigger table and risk changing what the kitchen felt like. She had a key, which they had not discussed formally. Logan had made her a spare when she locked herself out in October during a rainstorm, and he was at the job site. And he'd handed it back to her afterward and said, "You should just keep this." And she'd looked at the key for a moment and said, "Okay," and that was that. Lily decorated Gerald for Christmas. This involved red and green paint applied with a small brush, and the kind of focused artistic attention she otherwise reserved for the sketchbook, and the result was a rock that looked like Christmas in the general conceptual sense rather than any specific way, which Lily declared correct because Gerald was not a literal thinker. Victoria framed this, which was an absurd thing to do. She took a photo of Gerald in his holiday form, printed it at the drugstore, and put it in a small frame that she placed on her kitchen windowsill. When Lily found out, she stood in Victoria's kitchen for a long moment looking at the framed photo of the rock. "Why?" she said. "Because he's important," Victoria said. Lily looked at her, recalibrating. "Most people don't understand Gerald," she said. "Most people aren't paying attention," Victoria said. Lily considered this, and the look she gave Victoria was the look she gave things she intended to remember. That was December. January was cold in the specific way that Maine January was cold, the kind that had weight to it, and the 3 of them spent a Sunday afternoon in Logan's living room doing nothing in particular. Lily on the floor with the sketchbook, Victoria on the couch with a report she was reading, Logan in the chair across from her with the book he'd bought in November, and hadn't made much progress on because he kept stopping to look at things he didn't want to stop looking at. He was doing it now, looking at the room, his daughter on the floor, the familiar mess of her art supplies, the fire he'd built, the smell of the coffee that had gone slightly cold on the side table, looking at Victoria on the couch, her reading glasses on, her feet tucked under her, the report spread across her lap and a pen in her hand she clicked occasionally when she was thinking. She looked up and caught him looking. She raised her eyebrows. He shook his head slightly, meaning nothing significant, meaning just this, meaning I was looking because it's worth looking at. She held his gaze for a second, then went back to the report. He went back to the book. He read 2 pages. He stopped. He thought about the morning he'd split his thumb open with the hammer and decided the deck could wait another week. He thought about the moving truck next door on a Tuesday. He thought about crossing a strip of grass because someone was using the wrong screwdriver and he was a carpenter and couldn't ignore it. He thought about all the small and random and contingent things that had arranged themselves into this room on a Sunday afternoon in January. There was no lesson in it that could be packaged cleanly. That was the thing. People wanted the clean version. Do this, stop doing that, and the right things will find you. He'd wanted the clean version himself for a long time, but the reality was messier and more specific. He'd been afraid, and then he'd been tired of being afraid, and he'd crossed a yard at the right moment, and a woman had said 4 words on a summer afternoon, and he'd stood there like an idiot, and then he'd not stood there like an idiot. And none of it had been inevitable or guaranteed or smooth. It had been exactly as difficult as it should have been for someone who had spent years practicing the wrong things. He thought about the deck. He thought about 3 years of next weekend. He thought about the fact that the thing he'd been avoiding was not, in the end, the deck. Lily looked up from the sketchbook. "I'm drawing the deck," she announced. "Yeah? Logan said. She held it up. It was a top-down view, the diagonal boards rendered in crayon with a detail that was impressively accurate for someone who worked primarily in emotional truth rather than literal representation. In one corner, she'd drawn 3 figures, small, slightly lopsided, identifiable only by color and relative size. One tall, one medium, one small. "That's us," she said unnecessarily. "I can see that," Logan said. Victoria had put the report down. She was looking at the drawing with an expression Logan recognized, the one she got when something caught her somewhere unguarded. "Can I have it?" Victoria said. Lily looked at the drawing, looked at Victoria, made the calculation with the speed of a child who has already made it before asking was out loud. "Yes," she said, "but Gerald should be in it." "Draw Gerald in," Victoria said. Lily turned back to the sketchbook and added a small oval in the lower right corner with the care of someone adding a dignitary to an official portrait. She tore it out and handed it across. Victoria looked at it for a moment, and she didn't try to make her face do something neutral, which was one of the things Logan appreciated about her, the way she didn't perform emotions at arm's length. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," Lily said, and went back to the sketchbook. Logan watched Victoria fold the drawing carefully and set it with the report, and he looked at his daughter's bent head, and he looked at the fire, and he looked at the cold coffee on the side table, and he thought, this is what the future looks like when you stop running from it. Not a single moment, not one arrival. Just a Sunday afternoon in January, a fire, a drawing of 3 figures on a finished deck, a rock named Gerald in the corner. Later, after Lily was in bed and Victoria was putting on her coat to walk home, she still had her own house. They hadn't collapsed that boundary, and he respected the separation, the sense that what they were building was chosen every time rather than assumed. She paused at the back door. "Logan," she said. "Yeah." She looked at him in the particular way she had, the direct and unhurried way that had been there from the very beginning. "I'm happy," she said, like it was an important thing to say clearly, and she'd decided not to leave it unsaid. He felt it hit him squarely, no deflection, just landed. "Me too," he said. She went home. He stood at the kitchen window and watched her light come on. He stood there for a while. Not because he was afraid, not because something needed to be worked out or managed or assessed from a safe distance. Just because the light was on, and she was home, and he had learned finally, at 32, after 3 years and 1 unfinished deck and 12 Saturdays and 4 words on a warm afternoon, that some things were worth standing still for. Just to look. Just to know it was there. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and he slept the whole night through.